Welcome back to the channel, I'm Austin, and it's time for the EM2 VS FARA, discussing which one is the best long-range AR within Warzone. First, I'll give you the stats, then I'll give you my opinion, and tell you the best class setups at the end. And I'm going to set the like goal for this one at 50. We're going to go over the most important stats for ARs in Warzone. To start off with max bullet velocity, they're actually going to be tied at 1155. This is great because this is good for meta bullet velocity. You don't have crazy bullet drop off, and you don't have to lead your shots too much at range. And now if we take a look at fire rate, we can see that the FARA comes out on top with a 790 rounds per minute compared to 530. The FARA has an above average fire rate for assault rifles, while the EM2 shoots very slowly regardless of what category it's in. This gives the FARA the benefit of being more forgiving when you miss shots. More bullets downstream is always beneficial. Now let's see how much damage these weapons do. The EM2's average damage at close range is going to come out on top with 46 compared to 28.5 for the FARA. This advantage will hold true at long range as well with a 41.5 to 26 advantage. Now if we take a look at full damage breakdown, we're going to be taking a look at head, chest, stomach, and limb damage. We can see that both these weapons have similar damage profiles where they both have consistent damage from the chest to limbs. This makes these weapons easier to use while also being super consistent. The best weapons typically don't have damage drop off from chest to limbs. You always want a minimum of chest and stomach damage being the same because this means you can't make the weapon's TTK worse by aiming too low. You can only make it better with headshots. This is a good recipe for weapons within Warzone. And the most likely TTK at close range is going to go to the EM2 barely with a 678 millisecond compared to 684 for the FARA. The EM2 is only going to take 7 shots to kill and you can hit any part of the body for this TTK. The FARA has an extra 3 shots to kill at 10, and you can hit these 10 shots to the toe and still knock players. This makes both these weapons feel very good. Where the EM2 has the advantage is that you're only going to need 1 headshot to lower its TTK to 565 milliseconds. The FARA can lower its TTK as well by getting 2 headshots, and it will drop all the way down to 608 milliseconds. Going for headshots is going to be worth it on both these weapons at close range, and before we switch to long range TTK, let's actually talk about the range of these weapons. The FARA will have a slight advantage with a 27 meter range compared to 26 for the EM2. This isn't a distinguishable difference between the two, so no real advantage here. Moving on to long range TTK, the EM2 will once again have the better time to kill, but this time it will be a huge advantage with a 678 millisecond to 759. If you didn't notice, the EM2 has the same exact time to kill at long range as it did for close range. Pretty crazy. The EM2 will now take 4 less shots to kill with a 7 to 11 advantage. This is significant because the more shots to kill, the more likely you are to miss some. And for both these weapons, you can hit anywhere on the body to achieve their time to kills. Now both weapons will need 2 headshots to lower their time to kills. This is where the EM2's damage dropping off at long range will affect. Instead of 1 headshot, you're going to need 2, just like the FARA. The FARA will lower it to 684 milliseconds, while the EM2 will lower down to 565 milliseconds. Both weapons can lower their TTKs respectively with 4 headshots, but that isn't reasonable to think that someone can hit 4 headshots at 50 plus meters without hacking, and we don't condone hackers on this channel. I think it's easy to see that both weapons will feel super consistent and can easily lower their TTKs with headshots. One advantage the FARA has over the EM2 is going to be accuracy. The FARA still has some hefty vertical recoil, but it's a little easier to control than the EM2. Both these weapons have kick to them, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a little bit easier to aim the FARA. Taking a look at damage per mag, the EM2 will come out ahead of the FARA with a 2100 to 1596 advantage. This stat is going to be more influential the bigger the mode, making it the most important within quads, where both weapons have plenty of firepower. Switching over to long range damage per second, these weapons are basically identical, where the FARA is a bit better with a 329 damage per second to 327. Basically, this just means you can have more damage output at long range with the FARA, and this has a lot to do with its fire rate. Finally, moving over to the movement stats, the FARA will have a quicker ADS and strafe speed, whereas the EM2 will have faster movement and ADS movement. While they have equal sprint to fire times, I think it's clear to see that the FARA has superior mobility. While they both split this category 2 and 2, the FARA has a big advantage in ADS and strafe while only minor disadvantages in movement and ADS movement. For this category, I'm gonna have to give it to the FARA. If you guys could do me a quick favor and like the video, it really helps. Maybe even subscribe as well if you're enjoying these videos. Alright, I've given you all the relevant stats, and it's time for my verdict. The The EM2. The EM2's TTK doesn't drop off from close to long range, giving it a giant advantage over most weapons within Warzone. It also has great damage per mag, making it a great weapon in any mode. The FARA used to be a top tier weapon within Warzone when it was a beam that had higher damage, giving it a better TTK. The FARA got nerfed and is still a good weapon with solid movement and solid TTK, but at this point, it is viable, and I would say bottom tier meta, just barely squeaks in there. The EM2 should be viewed as a meta long range assault rifle. The recoil is not great, but once you get used to it, you're going to be able to manage that recoil with no problem. All in all, I think both these weapons should be used and should be in the top 10 class setups within Warzone, but I would just put the EM2 a little bit higher than the FARA. We're going to start off with my suggested weapon in this video, the EM2, and as you can see, I have it tiled long range in the top left because that's what we're making this for. So start off with, you got to go with Agency Suppressor because it gives you the bullet velocity and effective damage range and recoil control, which are three huge things to make this weapon better. Adding range, adding recoil control, those are both going to be super key. Then when we move over to the barrel, you got to use the 25.8 task force because once again, with this and the Agency Suppressor, we're going to get our max bullet velocity possible to make this thing be pretty much hit scan at long range, and this gets us horizontal and vertical recoil control, as well as making our range go up even more. So we're going to get to a little bit over 30 meters by doing this, and that's going to be key. Now for the optic, the base one actually makes your ADS really slow because it's actually viewed as a sniper scope, so that's why you have to change it. Even though you already have a base optic, you're definitely going to want the axial arms 3 times because first off, it has more zoom, and it also gives your ADS a boost, surprisingly, even though you're still using a 3 times optic. So then we go over to the magazine, and that's where you have a choice to make for yourself. You can either go with the 40 round or the 50 round. The 50 round will lower your ADS, whereas the 40 round will not. But I think if we're using this in a bigger mode like trio or quad, we're going to have to use this 50 round, and since we're not using it up close, the ADS time being slightly affected isn't that big of a deal because we did already affect it in the positive with the axial arms optic. So then from there, we got to go over to the underbarrel, and because like I said before, this thing does have some kick to it, and while you can adjust to controlling it well, you still want to get it to be as low as possible. So the field agent grip is going to get your horizontal and vertical recoil control up, and this is going to be the perfect weapon for long range, and I'll leave this up on screen for a couple seconds so you can take a screenshot if you need to. Now moving over to the FARA, this weapon is still very good and I definitely suggest you still use it. So we're going to start off by using the muzzle, and we're going to use the GRU suppressor. It's the same thing as the agency that we used last time. Vertical recoil control, bullet velocity, and effective damage range. And then we're going to go over to the 18.7 Spetsnaz RPK barrel because this also gets our max bullet velocity, gets our effective damage range up, and gives us horizontal plus vertical recoil control. So basically this is going to be the same exact setup that we just had for the EM2, although we can make one alteration if we want to. But first off, got to use the axial arms 3 times scope still. We're going to use the 60 round for the same reasons I picked the 50 round on the last one, because we are using this at long range, not close range, so the ADS getting slightly affected isn't a big deal. And the FARA's ADS is way better than the EM2, so it's not even a big deal to have that there. And then we go with the Spetsnaz grip. Now, if you can handle this recoil better than the EM2 and you don't think you need the Spetsnaz grip, I mean, I would highly suggest using it, but if you think you can get away without using it, one thing that the FARA does excel at is its strafe speed, so if you want to really emphasize that, you could go for this Raider stock or KGB skeletal stock, but I just don't think that makes sense using it on a long range weapon, and I would still keep up with the Spetsnaz grip. So this is literally the same exact setup that we just did for the EM2. But now if you want to know what close range weapon to use with this, I'm going to have 2 videos linked on screen right now so you can make the perfect class setup.